Yeah, the topic for today is allocentrism, which is a word that hardly anybody hears about. You hear about its opposite a little bit, which is egocentrism. So allocentrism is really about taking on perceptions and actions while considering others. So this would be the human community. I mean, I'm going to talk a little bit today about activists. I'm going to talk a little bit about artists and then scientists as part of that community that comes together and teaches about, acts upon, and researches water. But one of the partners that we really don't think about as much, being as kind of anthropocentric as most people are, is that water is really a partner as well, every bit as much as the scientists, artists, activists, and regulators who are involved. So I'm going to talk first a little bit about partnering with water itself and how we can encourage and increase our participation in that particular arena. I think a few weeks ago I put this slide up, and I'm going to show it again, just because there are really misconceptions about water. That water is not just a simple molecule, but it's a very complex kind of network that is responsible for a lot of things. And yes, it is a commodity because most everything that we deal with today has to be viewed at least somewhat in terms of the economic sector, but it's much more than that. It's much more than its laws, the politics, the economics, and the technology. There's something much more than that we need to realize in order to see water correctly. And then finally, it is a resource, and it's always been a resource to humans. And in some ways, it is a human right, or should be, but it's also a right for the entire planet and for all the other biological life that needs water on the Earth. I talked a little bit before about it being this kind of universal mediator, and I think that's how Theodore Schwenk looked at it, who was one of the great naturalists to look at water. And I think that's one of the easiest ways to look at water as being a partner with us, is that it mediates everything in our life, that without it, we couldn't function because we couldn't connect to the sun. We couldn't connect to other things in the universe, but through water we can. So whether it's its phase changes that give us our energy, whether it controls the climate, whether it's a constituent of all our bodies and all our bioenergetics, whether it structures us or whether it helps structure the universe in general, it is a mediator that links different forms of energy with matter, and different forms of matter. And I think one of the things to look at, if we're going to look at water in terms of how to partner with it, is that the ancients and the modern indigenous peoples had a way of looking at it that was way more than just a commodity. And it's not that they didn't use it, it's that they used it with a conscience. They used it with a reverence. They used it with a knowledge that this was much more than just something to drink when they were thirsty. That this had a real vital and fundamental role in their lives on this planet and in the universe. And so everything that they saw in nature, they believed was basically just different forms of water that were created from this quote unquote metaphoric waters, or these ancient waters. It was used as a metaphor for the formlessness that gave rise to the form that we see today. The other thing that's super important to understand about water as a partner is that it's a network, and from it emerges everything. And this emergence really has to do with the way these water molecules link to one another. And in that, it accesses information and transmits information. And biologists now think that that information itself may be what underlies all biological life. And if that's true, then the mediator of that, the way that information gets from a formless state to the forms, to the matter, to the energy that we deal with, is through water. And because of that, I talked a little bit about this idea of employing technologies that emulate water. One of the things that the human brain does really well is copy or emulate. And I think the more that we can emulate those kinds of technologies that I mentioned before, impellers or flow forms or rooftop landscapes or stormwater collection systems that model natural pathways in the watershed, or grafting materials, rocks and charcoal onto glaciers and things like that, is super important because it really puts us in touch with the water itself. And even though we might not be able to do that with what comes out of the sink, there's so much that we can do with regard to water in our environment. And the other thing is, in a very practical sense, the management rules and laws that we have that protect water, they should always really sort of protect the water and the watersheds itself before we think about how we can use them. And as a great example, in New Zealand, the ancient Maori culture has come up with some do's and don'ts that have to do with taking care of the water. And those, through a brilliant engineer named Kepa Morgan in New Zealand, have actually been able to write into the laws and regulations regarding water those indigenous ways of looking at it. Another group that is very much a partner in this allocentrism with everyone in dealing with water is activism. And activism that I'll talk about today is mainly centered on water quality, which is a huge which is a huge issue. How widespread is this problem of water quality? Well, if we're looking at just beaches alone, there's about 26,000 way back in 2006, and about 25% of the time the water is contaminated, mostly from stormwater runoff and sewer system leaks, but also from the deliberate disposal of wastes. Is the water testing adequate? Well, yes, there's a few pathogens and pollutants that are analyzed, but the turnarounds are sometimes long, and they can't always provide warnings in time. So then the question is there something else that we can rely on? Yes, there is laws, there is legislation, but that often depends on the involvement of either organized or citizen activists. And that's why they become so important in this whole thing, because they too are looking at water not only from a selfish standpoint, but also one of protecting others, including the water itself. So how do most people really perceive this issue of water quality? And a surprising number think that governing agencies both protect water quality and advise people of health standards. But that isn't really true unless there's the citizen activists and organized activists that are there to make sure that's being done. And so it's really all of our responsibility to look out for the safety of not only ourselves, but of other creatures that are in the water and of other people using the water. And one of the ways we can do this is looking at science-based indicators, but there's a lot of them. There's things like heavy metals and pathogens and household cleaners and pharmaceuticals that we know get into the water. But that's very technical, and we need to have a laboratory to do that. One of the things that I've looked at is whether or not there's sensory-based things that we can just look at the water or feel the water that will indicate to us that there may be something wrong with the water quality. And so we looked at things like, is it close to river mouths or discharge pipes that might be polluting? Is there an unusual odor to the water, or does it feel different? Is it slick or something that might indicate petroleum? The clarity of the water. Look around and see if there's, marine mammals, if there's dolphins and fish nearby. Is there foam? Is it really foamy? Does it look dirty above the tidal line? Those kinds of things can be super important in terms of being a real watchdog for water. And I think more and more we're seeing that these citizen activists are doing a great job in keeping the authorities on their toes about what's going on.
Yeah. Are any of you familiar with the Surfrider Foundation? No?
I am. I used to work for them.
You want to just mention quickly about Surfrider and the work that they do, Wes?
Yeah, Surfrider is a group that was started in Southern California, and they do a whole range of things. One is they've got what they call a blue water task force, which goes out and actually does small scale testing of water. They train people to do that. They do litigation in terms of trying to get beach access and restoring water quality. And they do a lot of education as well. So they're a very kind of hands-on group that is certainly one of the most well-known as being sort of an organizational, activists.
Yeah, I got to know them very early on and did beach cleanups with them. And even today, more recently in Kauai, I called them when there was some debris, and they sent volunteers out to help and clean up. So that's just an active group that you all can know about and should know about, that you can support. And they are supporting, as Wes says it, allocentrism is all aspects of water. So it's not just the oceans, but it's rivers and streams and lakes and just all the water, where mostly we recreate and we enjoy ourselves.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, Stuart, in that you can't just look at the oceans as sort of a separate ecosystem, divorced from everything else. Rainfall, incoming rivers and streams, street runoff, all those kinds of things have a huge effect on particularly the nearshore coastal environment. And by the same token, as I talked about a couple of weeks ago, the ocean then provides the fresh water to the land. And so it's very much a cycle. And there's a degree of watching out for all these various aspects of the hydrologic cycle, knowing that none of them operate in isolation and all of them affect all of the others. So I think that's an important point. The next thing that I'll talk about, and I probably won't get through all my talk today, but I'm sure I'll visit you sometime over the next 4 weeks, is artistic perceptions of water. In my experience, artists have played a huge role in terms of helping to bring in different kinds of people who would not normally be drawn into water protection or water issues through the science alone. And it's true that art and music are often described in terms of patterns or rhythms as a combination of kind of repeated elements. The same way that scientific descriptions of water are oftentimes associated with shapes or geometries or frequencies or cycles. So there's this kind of natural correlation between art and science in the way that they look at the world. And I think in many cases, people who are not inclined to be kind of intellectually drawn into issues or arguments or problems associated with water from an intellectual viewpoint are very much so from an artistic one. I think because there's something that's universal that underlies scientific theories and works of art or music and our perception of beauty. And sharing these interdisciplinary insights requires a way to actually talk about them. And I think this whole idea of talking about patterns and whether they be rhythmic patterns associated with music or spatial patterns associated with art or sculpture is extremely important. That spirals and vortices that we see in the atmosphere and that, you know, carry water around the globe over a range of scales have transcended both cultures and millennium. And this idea that art and science is really separate is actually something that's relatively new to humankind. You know, artists like Leonardo, who were primarily artists, were as much scientists as they were artists. So there's a lot of artificial divides, I think, today that are really, really artificial and shouldn't be at all.
Yeah. Wes, I think I've maybe mentioned to our emissaries that we plan to have an extraordinary artist, and she's more called a researcher, Veda Austin from New Zealand, who has taken on the work of Masaru Emoto. Is anyone familiar with Masaru Emoto and the work he did in one of his most famous books called The Memory of Water? Anyone know that one? Nope. Okay, well, it's one of our favorites and one that you'll get exposed to. So Veda Austin takes pictures of water. She then freezes the water in a typical freezer, brings it out after 10 or 15 minutes, and the images that are shown in the water are beyond words and so miraculous, where she will say her name to the water, put the water in the freezer, bring it out, and in the water will be a crystalline structure and beautiful artwork that'll have a big V for Veda in it. And she's got over 13,000 images she's done this with, from sound, speech, images, even thoughts. So it blends what Wes is talking about, I think, pretty clearly about the artistic creative side, as well as the scientific validated side of water being such an incredible compound.
Yeah, it really is. And then, you know, the whole idea, what you're talking about, Stuart, is about the communication with water. But there's also the communication among different groups and different disciplines that deal with water. And I think one of the problems we face today is that they don't communicate very well. I think Bob Bocock said something about, you know, the fact that you know, regulators on the federal level don't talk to regulators on the state level or on the local level or on the city level. And I think that communicating among either activists or professionals that work in water is extremely important, because we're all really you know, after the same thing. And I think these artificial divides don't really do us much good. I've actually looked into something called a pattern language that's been developed for software design and architecture and other kinds of applications that may be used to help us communicate with one another from different fields by relating to different patterns, rather than using, you know, really kind of arcane or unfamiliar jargon or mathematics or things like that, which tend to alienate some people. So I think there's ways in which we can work together as a group, you know, everybody interested in water, to try to think about how we can communicate. And I think this is a way that we might be able to do it. So it allows us to kind of systematically communicate to one another what's going on. And I'll just kind of end my first part of this talk by saying that I think there's some things that we oftentimes don't do that are very simple, that would bring us closer to water and bring us closer to other groups who are working with water. One is discovering or looking into what is the source of our own water that comes out of our tap. I think that's extremely important because it gives us not only a really good appreciation for how that water gets to us in terms of the engineering, but also of the value of the watersheds from which we get that water. And I live here in California, and a lot of times the water that I end up using and drinking comes from a long way away from where I actually live. And for me to understand the importance of protecting places, watersheds that are even very far away from where I live is extremely important in terms of the quality of water that is available for me to drink. And I think another way that we oftentimes overlook connecting to water and connecting to groups, similar groups that are working with water, is to personally experience water ourselves. And whether it's surfing or swimming or scuba diving or just sitting and listening to the sounds and ripples from a stream, or looking at a lake or something like that, the more time that we can spend in nature with water, I think gives us not only a greater appreciation, but a greater sort of camaraderie with all groups and all peoples that are working toward improving our relationship with water. And then finally, I think recognizing that a lot of what we've been taught about water and a lot of the ways that we refer to it is really based on sort of collective views of water. And these are oftentimes not really personal interactions, but they're more representational. And I really believe that the more that we can sort of come together and really experience water rather than try to abstract it, will bring us much closer. I was going to go into a little bit of the politics of water, but I see by the time that we're probably getting close to getting the groups together. So I think I'll stop here, sort of halfway, and ask if there's any particular questions that come up regarding the whole idea of allocentrism and water within the group.
No questions? All right, madam, why don't you talk about us breaking into groups and what we're going to do in groups, please?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, West. I apologize if you can't hear my roommate decided to vacuum our living room. But we are going to be going into breakout rooms now to sort of discuss allocentrism and community a little bit more. So I'm just going to share my screen so that we can take a look at the questions, and then we will get divided into breakout groups. So first, we're just going to introduce ourselves the way that we did the first day, but just doing it again so that we can all sort of associate faces and names. If you want to have your camera on, that would be really great, just so that we could sort of see each other in person. And then the questions that we have for you are, have you heard of allocentrism before? So is this a concept that you've encountered at all, maybe in school or in philosophy, perhaps? It's also sort of within that category. What does it mean to be a part of a community in general? And then also defining community in your own words. So is it based on, a group of people that have something in common? How little or how much do you need to have in common in order to be a community? And then finally, what water issues do you see benefiting from an increased sense of community, or how do you see this being something that we can tie into water activism as a whole? So I'm going to do breakout rooms that are going to be assigned automatically, so that we can all sort of get to know each other, and then we will go from there. We're going to be here for about, what time is it? It's 8:03, so we're going to be here for about 15 minutes, and then we'll regroup before the end of the session for tonight and sort of go over what we talked about. So I will see all of you in the breakout rooms.
We got a little, we were working on one last little piece that we got cut a little bit short. Lee and Hope, if you wouldn't mind just sharing it openly, would you be okay with that? Just what you're optimistic about? The question was, what is each individual optimistic about what they can do in their own way in the world to make things better for all of us?
Yeah, I was just talking about how, like, in a general sense, I feel like, especially with the younger generations, I think as a whole, we're all trying a lot harder to care about more of these big issues that are affecting everybody. So I'm hopeful that we can make a change because younger and younger people are starting to care, and that's very important.
Great. Hope, anything on your end?
I agree with Lee, especially the generational aspect. A lot more people are starting to care. As an individual, personally, I'm not entirely optimistic that I can make a huge change because I know that there's still so many people out there, and it's hard to make a huge change as one person. But I do believe that one thing that like I can do is like lower how much waste I produce, like my plastic use, small things like that throughout the day. Even if it might not make a huge change, I know it's something that I can try to do.
That's wonderful. Great to hear. Anyone else? You want to chime in? Whether Hannah, Alejandro, Esther, Gargi? What, whether you're optimistic or not, and just what can you do? What single action can you take, or would you like to take that could improve the quality of life, whether it's water or it's any other area of life?
I'm moderately optimistic. Like the others said, like there can be changes, and the younger generation is more conscious about the choices they make. So the best way is to like make conscious choices and like try to help everyone around us to make better choices and have a more inclusive view, have a more inclusive perspective, like not just one focus, and consider every perspective and every aspect of whatever we do.
And is there anything in particular that you are inspired and excited to do?
My background is civil engineering, so I really like the concept of circular and design for disassembly. So that is one aspect that and in water is like more water accessibility to clean water for children and women who don't get it in many places around the world, and there's so much wastage of good water in so many pointless ways. Yeah.
Who else? Hannah, Alejandro, Esther?
I think Gargi said it really well. I think another thing too is just remember to do your research and not be afraid to look more into things if you're unsure, just because it can be really hard to interpret information and trust information, especially from like big companies. We were talking about the food industry a lot in our breakout room. So just doing your research, and just because you can't always trust what you see. So, just basing your decisions off of like Gargi said, all these different perspectives.
Yeah. Well, the number one thing we can all do is we vote with our dollars. So every time we buy a product, we are supporting something, whether it's aligned with our values or not. And it's so critical, I think, for us, and particularly your generation who says, I'm not going to buy that because I don't agree with that company, its ethics, or the way that it carries itself, or of course, the impact it's having on our health and on our planet. So I think that's a great area, Hannah, and glad to hear that that's something you're attuned to. Alejandro, Esther?
Yeah, I'm also somewhat optimistic for the future. I think humans are a very resilient species, if anything, and if it might take a while, but we'll learn to adapt and grow to situations around water. Specific issues I'm thinking about. My background's in biodiversity, And so that's not necessarily one that I should be very optimistic about, but I do think that the current generation of young people are the ones who are best suited to take on some of these big issues that are global in scope.
Great. Well, I'm glad to hear you have optimism because we need that desperately. Esther and Hannah, let's hear from you.
I'll just say, as the only person who said they're not optimistic, that I am not optimistic in the slightest. Maybe it's because I'm an econ major, but I am just not really optimistic about a lot of the issues that our generation is supposed to fix. And I do believe that individual actions, for example, can make a difference, but it's just kind of hard to do that when corporations do so much to counter those effects. For example, like I've been recycling since I was 14, and I just recently found out that I think only about 9% of what you recycle actually makes it. That's insane. It kind of broke my
Yeah,
heart. So it's
it's
just small things
horrible.
like that, or even just Amazon. Did you know that some of the stuff that you like return doesn't actually make it back to the facility? It goes into a landfill. That is heartbreaking. So just small things like that, you know, I don't really see like the light in the tunnel, but I should, because I should find it at some point. But yeah, I do believe individual actions is great for certain issues, and maybe just not all of them, but I am not really optimistic. So yeah.
Well, thanks for your honesty and your transparency, because we need to have that. And I can understand why you are not. I mean, there's a lot for us to be worried about and sad about in the world. Yet there is a lot for us to be happy and positive about. And so we need to focus, of course, on what is good and what is positive. Also being realistic about it's a tough road and journey that we're on, yet it's solvable. And the way it is going to be solved is through all of us, one, being educated, understanding the real issues, and then it's collaboration, because people are all separate and they're not understanding that we're all in it together. There is no separation. All of the water, the air, and even the soil that we are using, it's all connected everywhere on the planet. It's not separate from anywhere. And so by working together, we can make the change we wish to see in the world, which is, you know, Gandhi's quote. So I appreciate your reality check, and the fact that I also feel, Esther, that you do have your areas of optimism, knowing that there is a way forward. And it looks bleak right now, yet there's another side at the end of that tunnel that's very, very bright and white. And so we got to make that happen. We all got to work together for that. So finally, Hannah Cohen, we haven't heard from you. Are you there?
Yeah.
Awesome. We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly would have to kind of agree with Esther and not being very optimistic. I feel like people have been like for years like sounding the alarm, and I feel like we're still sounding the alarm, and we're still waiting, and we're still calling for action. And I mean, I know like I personally have tried to implement a lot of like little things in my own personal life and like individual actions. And I know other people who have, but like ultimately like it's really up to the system that we live in to you know, like I can't really help that I need to buy food and like where I can get my food from, and like I can try to get like, you know, the more sustainable options, but it's always hard to know what really is the most sustainable option. But I mean, I do see a lot of like hope in like Gen Z and working to create solutions. But you know, I'm not a huge fan of like putting all the work onto Gen Z and like saying like it's all our job to do it, but I do see that there is a lot of potential. So yeah.
Great. Well, I'm glad you ended on a high note and a sense of optimism. One of the speakers, actually it's a speaker next week that we are going to have that you are going to love, is Drew Fitzgerald. And Drew is partners with Jaden Smith, Will Smith's son, who launched a number of brands, but one of them is called Just Water. And they were one of the first waters to be in a paper box. And they launched this just because of their passion and concern about water, particularly in low-income minority communities. And they have grown this brand to be over $100 million brand, all focused on doing good, doing well. And, you know, I'm not going to criticize them, but the water's okay. The water could be much better than what they're bringing forward, but their message has a very important message, and they're connecting with lots of people that are more the masses and the lay people to become aware of, oh my goodness, you know, all this plastic bottle waste is unacceptable. So Drew will be speaking with us and talking about what they've done, the different projects. There's another project they have called Water in a Box, which is a mobile water box that purifies water that they first started in Flint, Michigan, when they had the crisis there, and they brought it into all the communities there. Then they went to Newark when Newark had its lead poisoning, and they've now got, I think, 17 to 20 communities in the United States, including Indian reservations, that they are providing water in the box to. So you're going to hear Drew on Thursday, and he'll inspire you and let you understand, you know, we can make a difference. And clearly, Will Smith's, you know, reputation and his following helps out a lot. But we got Drew as part of our team. So anything we want to share with Drew, he'll be behind this. And as I've said to you all before, this whole community that we have, if you've had a chance to look at waterinnovation.com and see the well community, has everyone had a chance to do that yet? If you haven't, take a look at waterinno.com. I'll put it in the chat box there, waterinno.com. That's our website where we founded all of our activities, which Water Emissaries is one of the activities of the Water Innovation Advisors. And the well community is a community that we've created with water enthusiasts and advisors around the globe, which West is one of our key leaders in. And you'll see all the people that are there and their different backgrounds and what they're doing. Drew happens to be one of those people that's part of the well community as well. So take a look. And if there's people there, once again, that you're interested in learning about, or someone you would say, hey, you know, will you get this person as a speaker? We'd like to have them talk about what they're doing. Please let us know that, because once again, this is for you. So as much input as you can give us, the better. And the other thing is, let us know as we're going along, what would you like us to improve as we're going along? Would you want more involvement? Do you want to have more visual? Do you want to have more time together and building more of your community? Let us know, because we're here for you to provide whatever you want. And we don't know unless you tell us and give us whatever feedback. So Wes, anything else before we close?
No, I don't think so. Looks like we'll end on time.
Great. Well, Wes, thank you for sharing with us and for bringing this word allocentrism to all of our minds, because none of us had heard about this before. So you're not alone. However, it's sort of fun, right? You could share with your friends, hey, you know what allocentrism is? And, you know, and then talk with them about it and get involved and engaged about, well, how can we do something in the world to make this better? And I think I've said this to you before, but I'm going to say it again. I apologize to you and your generation for endowing you with the burden of cleaning up our act. We didn't realize it. We messed up. And we're here, particularly our community, to be your partner, to take responsibility and say, you know what, we messed up. Okay, what can we do to work with you and support you in your passion, your vision, your energy to clean up our act because it's way overdue. So don't be bashful. You guys are speaking up more and more, which we're really happy to hear that, see that, and feel that. And as I think you've all seen the schedule, so Drew's talk on Thursday is going to be exceptional. Next week, I think we're going to have a speaker who's going to do some interesting work with what's called somatics and making us more kinesthetically aware of our bodies, our body language, our voice, our intonation, how we're talking loudly or when we're talking more quietly and what it has people do. So that's going to be an interesting session that we have coming up with one of our advisors. We're hoping to get Aaron Brockovich in for one of our sessions as well, which will be exceptional. And if there's any other particular topics or people that you'd like to see from the well or otherwise, let us know and we'll see if we can get them to come in and join us. And then the other thing that's really going to be big for you all is we have a career day and a fair day, as we call it, where we have different groups that come in that are for-profit companies like 3M and Evoqua to NGOs and not-for-profits to have you know about them and see if there's either internship opportunities or job opportunities or just ways that you can, you know, see where your passion is and lead you down some other pathways. So that's a little tidbit for you about our future sessions. And I know you all have a lot of responsibilities and a lot of commitments, particularly with your schools. So we're grateful for you to be here and to participate as deeply as you are.